So in this discussion, we're surely going to talk about UP elections, a little bit about the lynching, and also about Chudail.
People used to imagine that the way to change society and to break power and make new power for themselves is the storming of the Bastille, something we borrow from the French Revolution. There, while the men are freeing themselves and enslaving other men, women are always enslaved in both situations, sitting behind a chulha and making rotis. There'll be these big people and these male journalists going in there with cameras or something saying, I'm a pollster, tagged to their forehead. And you think some woman who's scared, or someone from an oppressed caste, or someone who's decided to defy the norm, and the norm being that you must vote for you know who. So the feudal elites in UP that had a stranglehold for decades is what the BJP provided. The middling castes and the new middle class, they provided a voice of resistance to these feudal elites.
Welcome everyone. This is Venkat from Edina. We are a community media house based out of Karnataka, and we are looking to aggregate people's voices and in this process also amplify it. In this election, we saw how independent media played a crucial role as the fourth pillar. And in this series, what we're going to do is talk to people about democracy and dissent. And I'm very thrilled to have Revati on board with us. So welcome, Revati. The introduction of Revati is quite long in the sense that she is a journalist, she is a filmmaker, she's also written a book called Anatomy of Hate. And I think the perverse situation which surrounds us today, it may be a good idea to read that book because through case study, it tries to explain where its origins could be. She's also runs an organization called Sarforoshi Foundation. And the way I would like to describe her is there are two parts of it. One is she's a grassroots activist who works with people. The other is she works with words and grammar as a journalist. In both of them, I think she has a very incisive way to looking at society, specifically resistance. And in both of them, I think she brings hope to us. So in this regard, Revati, welcome aboard to Edina. Thank you so much for joining us.
That's very generous of you, Venkat. Usually when people ask me what I am, I just say I'm a witch, I'm a Chudail, a woman who has her feet screwed on backwards. That's the easiest way to describe dissent.
Yes, thank you. So in this discussion, we're surely going to talk about UP elections, a little bit about the lynching, and also about Chudail. Right? So that will be the context of this discussion. Before we start, I want you to talk about something you wrote after the election. You wrote after the election about subversiveness. When I read that, I thought about another book called Albert Camus' Rebel. In that, he was talking about all or nothing, a very offensive, all upfront way of rebelling. And that is considered more or less the textbook method of rebelling. But somehow in your book, in your article, you actually flipped it around. You said there is something called subversive, and you called it the Chudail, right? Ulte Pao ki Chudail. So in some sense, there is two different ways of looking at it. One is the Albert Camus Rebel, and there's Revati Lal calling something Chudail. And Chudail's method of looking at UP is perhaps the way for us to understand UP is what you have claimed in that article. And that's quite interesting. So would you spend a little time and take as long as you want to help us understand as a journalist and as who confirms with this idea of Chudail to help us understand how UP elections panned out for us?
Thanks so much. I feel it's interesting that you start with Camus because the world that Albert Camus inhabited was more masculine than the world that writers get to inhabit today. People are still in a patriarchal masculine frame, but the more woke, happening, cool, subversive part of our world that bends and stretches people's imagination is no longer masculine. It is trans or it is feminine. And what I mean by that is that people used to imagine that the way to change society and to break power and make new power for themselves is the storming of the Bastille, something we borrow from the French Revolution, or breaking of the barricades, unshackling chains from slaves. All of this comes from what enslaved men do to free themselves from other men. And women aren't even in the picture anywhere in this. While the men are freeing themselves and enslaving other men, women are always enslaved in both situations, sitting behind a chulha and making rotis for the enslaved and the free. So, but what the political imagination allows us to do in a world which is less driven by physical power and more by knowledge power, in a world that is driven more by online and social media to influence the way we think and the way power breaks down, we finally have the ability for people who talk a lot and who are storytellers and who tend to be women to change the way power moves. And in that society, rather than a storming of the Bastille and the breaking of the barricades, what works is this quiet resistance of the woman who says yes to the man beating her all the time, or the society that says yes to an oppressive dictator, but from the inside does the opposite. As any woman working in any household behind a pot and having to say yes to a drunk man so that she survives that day, politically that means that instead of revolution, actually somebody who influenced me very greatly is someone who was a character in the book that I wrote called The Anatomy of Hate. And he later told me, he said, Revati, revolution contains the word evolution within it. So resistance can also be evolutionary. You change one cell at a time. COVID-like. You break down small molecular structures of a society in insidious ways. And before you know it, the framework has changed. Or to borrow from our Home Minister Amit Shah, who described what he thought were radical jihadi Muslims, stroke terrorists, and in the imagination of people, any Muslim. There was a stretchable imagination deliberately provided in that sentence in which he said, they are termites, they eat the cupboard up from the inside. But that is what resistance or feminine resistance or a trans resistance could also look like. And a resistance made up of people in UP this time in this election. The very masculine opinion pollsters, all of whom were men, could not see that a society that is riddled by fear and by very feudal tropes, where the man, the zamindar, the landowning castes always dictate what should be done. And the other castes, the other communities, and people who don't want to conform can't say that they are not conforming. They don't conform, but the polls, the masculine driven polls, there'll be these big people and these male journalists going in there with cameras or something saying, I'm a pollster, tagged to their forehead. And you think some woman who's scared, or someone from an oppressed caste, or someone who's decided to defy the norm, and the norm being that you must vote for you know who. If someone is not doing that, you think they're going to say it? No, but they'll do it and you won't know. And thank you very much. That is what happened in UP. Now, if we were to unpack how and why it happened, I think it's very interesting to look not in the places that we're looking at, which is, this very flatlining of hate politics versus the other, or liberals versus hardliners. It's boring and it's not instructive of what happened in UP. Or what could be happening post the elections everywhere in the country, that the story is where you least imagine it to be, right in the center of the firmament, inside the burning, as Rumi the poet once described. The place to look inside for answers to anything is inside the burning. So if we look inside the cauldron of the hard right, which we imagine to be a cauldron of hate and Muslim haters and right-wing leaning people, is actually a lot of very different communities that are aspirational and that have been subversive, and that their vote for the BJP was in the first place a subversive vote against feudal elites. So the feudal elites in UP that had a stranglehold for decades is what the BJP provided the middling castes and the new middle class. They provided a voice of resistance to these feudal elites. And in order for people to make that a credible voice of resistance, they had to define their politics ideologically in equal and opposite terms to the feudal elite. So if the feudal elite for decade upon decade was secular and socialist, the resistance to that had to be bigoted and centrist. So it was an opposite. So it was a subversive move away from the feudal elite. Now that this new sort of vote over the last decade also meant that the UP people who were subversive saw that even after voting away from this feudal elite, what happened was that they were still not in control of their circumstances. They decided to throw this elite out as well. So, what is happening is that there is a set of people who refuse to conform. And instead of saying that suddenly these people have thrown away right-wing ideology and UP is the new hope, we have to look at what is inside the right wing in the first place. It is a cauldron like witch walking backwards. It is the opposite of what we imagine. And it is not completely the opposite, which is why it's subversive. So it is neither a complete throwing away of the right-wing idea, nor is it a full acceptance. It is throwing away everything that we imagine is true. That's why it's truly subversive. And it makes sense when you look at it from the point of view of a homemaker who's sitting in her house and is constantly having to listen to the mother-in-law, the father-in-law, the husband, the brother, her own father. I mean, where are her spaces of freedom? And politically, when a society is shackled first and is trying to get out of it and is in a firmament, now from the 1990s, we're a market economy. And in that market economy, a whole lot of people who are very, very oppressed, the extreme backward classes, they consist of a large swath of Hindu OBC classes. There are many different castes like the Mauryas and the Nishads and the Sainis and the Kashyaps, many castes who are either trader, agricultural labor. They have very little control of their circumstances, typically over the decades. But in a market economy, for the first time, they're within tasting distance of what it could be like to have a little bit more control. So first they go to the people who are against the landed classes, which is the Jats, which is the Gujars. So those castes have typically voted for the RLD or the Samajwadi Party. So they go against that and they vote for the BJP. Therefore, the vote wasn't communal to begin with necessarily. Parts of it were and parts of it weren't. And then the coming of a part of it isn't a move away from communal because it was a mix of all these various forces to begin with. Okay. That's why it is truly, it's easier to understand it when you look at it as a constant struggle for people to gain control over their lives. And that's why the witch metaphor makes sense, because these are always the women who were pushed out of the village for being too self-willed and for wanting to wrest control over a feudal family. And in the political context, that's why I feel it's easiest to understand it in these terms.
And during your travel, did you see this even before the election? Maybe you couldn't quantify it, but did you see this? Would you share some of these stories? Because they might actually highlight some of these stuff which was hidden.
Yes, I did. I mean, I live and work in Western UP in a district called Shamli. And that went to vote in the first phase. And before the first phase, before I had actually started to travel, like many other people and like the pollsters, I felt that this was going to be a clean sweep for the BJP. But when I started to travel, I saw that a lot of aspirational castes, particularly OBCs, who typically voted for the BJP and who were their traditional vote base, but that had been ignored or passed over, that were hoping that suddenly, because they had been loyal to this party, that the light would shine on them, that they would either get reservations or that they would get jobs. That there was a large section of young unemployed boys who had just turned 18 or 19 and who were frustrated by the fact that the people they had been loyal to, namely Narendra Modi and the UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, they felt that they were not getting anything out of being loyal for this last decade, and there was this frustration because they hadn't seen anything else. You know, they were too small when there was any other government. So for them, their first political reality is this, So their first resistance will also, after a certain point of time, be only this. So a lot of them found that the Agniveer, they in Western UP, if you decide to be an early riser and wake up and you venture out at 5 or 6 in the morning, you will find most maidans and streets in villages and in the small towns populated by young boys running in shorts and chappals and training, like running kilometers and kilometers and putting themselves through this army drill, because they're all trying to get employed by the army or by the police, and they're all sitting for those exams. And then this Agniveer thing comes along and it takes away their hope, because they feel that, oh, now I'm only going to get temporary employment for 3 years. So that was one thing that began to be seen as one travel, that this is a set of disenchanted middling OBC rising middle class aspirational caste people who are feeling let down and are frustrated, and they still like Modi and they still like Yogi. They don't know how to articulate their frustrations. So what they started telling me was, we like Modi, aayega to Modi hi, but we don't want to vote for the incumbent MP who's contesting again, because he has done nothing for us. He's an arrogant bastard. So when they started to say this repeatedly, many middling castes started to say this. It sounded like like I was like the confessor. I was like, you were in a confession box and I was the priest sitting on the other side, and they were trying to say, I don't like my daddy, but they weren't being able to say it clearly. So they were saying, I don't like my mommy instead.
Yeah.
They're saying, I don't like the MP, but they weren't being able to say, I don't like my daddy, because it was too much for them to say. But by the time the second and the third phase came around, this descent started to gather, pick up speed. And as I traveled to Eastern UP in the before the last phase went to vote, on the ghats of Banaras, I saw it was like there was smoke rising out of the river Ganges. It was really interesting because it was a dark evening. It was a few days before Modi's constituency was going to vote, and there was a bevy of camera persons and little sort of live OBs on the ghats, and everybody was saying Jai Shri Ram and Modi and chanting. And as soon as the same people got moved out of the frame of the camera, they were venting spleen and using expletives and saying that BASTARD and other words which I'm not going to mention on Eidina unless it's allowed.
Yes.
Is it allowed? You can use your imagination.
Well, I should ask the editor what the policy is on that.
Meanwhile, everyone, I'm sure, can imagine all the rest in their heads.
Correct.
But there was this young, spindly-legged, knock-kneed boy selling tea who looked like he was maybe 16 or 17 or younger. And he was wearing an I am from Modi's family, which was the thing on Twitter, on X, and selling tea. And I said, so you're from Modi's family? He said, what is the big deal about wearing a t-shirt? Who the F cares? This is just a effing t-shirt. And then there was this vendor selling stuff on the ghats, trinkets behind him. And he said, it has 18% tax on GST on education. And they were quantifying, these are street vendors, quantifying this. And quantifying their dissent, quantifying how there's unemployment, quantifying the double speak. And then they were also saying, this arrogant man, the chief minister, and this arrogant prime minister of ours, he was on the ghats the other day, and he went past one of these gullies and said, this needs to be cleaned up, and that means all of us shopkeepers have to suddenly be invisibilized from here. And where are we going to go? So there was this sense building. It was slowly building into a storm. And I made sure I asked people when they were talking, and they were talking without me actually going to them. I was just sitting there on the ghats, to cool my heels on a very hot day. It was 45, 48 degrees, almost 50 degrees. And I wasn't actually going out there and asking people anything, which is why people were talking. And you could hear something real.
Yeah.
So the subversiveness comes if you're not going out there looking for it, firstly. Because otherwise it's going to, these are people who are very savvy and they're also very disenchanted with the regime. So they're not going to say anything to you. So if you're not actually going out there with a poking them with a mic or with surveys on a clipboard, then they'll say stuff. Women were saying stuff. They were coming out of Samajwadi Party and India Alliance rallies. I said, what did you get out of this? These are people with cracked heels. The best way to gauge the economic level of a woman is to look at how her feet are. How bad her feet are. So if her heels are very badly cracked, she doesn't really have any decent footwear and she walks a lot and she's overburdened with physical work. So someone like that I was talking to, and I said, what do you get out of this rally? So she said, 8,500 rupees in every account for a woman.
Wow.
So a lot of people were saying that this message hadn't gone down to the masses, but in some places it had trickled down.
Yeah.
But I would also add this caveat that when I traveled, we also asked a lot of people, okay, you are from various different OBC castes, Dalit castes, women, Muslims for sure, who are now stacking up against the regime. But they said, we want to be very clear that we are equally, we are not enamored by the India Alliance either. So this was not a vote for the India Alliance, it was a vote against the BJP, but also with a warning to the India Alliance, saying, how many times did the Muslims asked us this? Muslim weavers who are out of work and who are working as daily wage workers, they were saying, why did Rahul Gandhi not mention what they're going to do for Muslims? Why in speech after speech did he talk about OBCs, he talked about women, he talked about tribal people, he talked about migrants? Why was the M word not mentioned? The M word we were looking for.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
Mushaira and not Mangal Sutra, but Muslim.
Yes.
Why did Rahul not use the correct M word?
Yeah. Okay.
So that is one thing they said very strongly. The other thing they said is that we also realize that we have been used like putty by the so-called secular brigade as well, and we're not conversant of that, and we haven't forgotten that. Those were things that were said very strongly as well. So this verdict from UP, where you see that the BJP is reduced to 33 seats out of 80, was also not a clear green flag for the opposition either. And that is actually very sobering. It means that people just basically want what they want. They don't want to be beholden to anyone. They don't like being beholden. When they have been beholden, they're doing it under duress and they're doing it out of fear.
Yeah. The Chudel does not belong to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the, yeah. So
Yeah.
there's one more thing I want a small input from you, because most of the analysis which come out often are of two types. One type is trying to say the political parties engineered it very well, right? They got the math right. यहाँ पे OBC डाल दिया, यहाँ कर दिया, वाह. That's why Bihar did badly, UP did better. And that kind of analysis, or the other one would be RSS did not participate, as if it participated in Kerala but did not participate in Uttar Pradesh. They seem to lose the idea of people who are what we are aggregating in election. And you seem to be bringing that out. While it's sobering, it also means that there has to be something done by the opposition if it's in power in state. It also needs to do something. Can you also elaborate that part? Why that kind of analysis is not maybe it's right in partly. I'm not saying dismissing it, but it needs to be thought little ground up the way you're saying.
I think our analysis needs to be, based with people who are also kind of working behind chulhas and sitting in homes with blackened feet and blackened faces and with their feet on the ground. What's happening is that a lot of analysis is being done from behind laptops and aggregating numbers and based on polls, but it is not actually feeling and eating and breathing what people are on the ground. So a lot of this goes missing when that doesn't happen. So we've also actually what's happening is that we've stopped at the elections, but the UP story has moved. Like, we've forgotten about the elections in UP and we are moving on with business as usual. And business as usual means there are lynchings, and there are also everyday murders. In the district I'm in Shamli, a regular murder of a man because he happened to be Muslim was carved out recently by some misreporting as a lynching, which it wasn't. So what's happening is that we are imagining this to be a one kind of polarization only, and we are not really actually seeing that what needs to be done is that the people's aspirations are about jobs. This vote is about people saying we want to save the constitution. There are many Dalits who took an oath in UP on the constitution and then went out to vote. So in the 40 plus constituencies that the opposition has won, what has it been seen to be doing, and what has it communicated apart from the top leaders going off on holidays? You know, what have they done in their constituencies in this last month and a half? Where if they've talked in parliament, have they come back and broadcast this to the ground? Have they said, we are canvassing for the things that you elected us for? We know that you want a railway station at this district. The MP of the Kairana Lok Sabha, which is Shamli, she just went to the parliament and talked about these small things that people want. So what is interesting is that this is a very, very polarized district. It is an area which saw communal violence in 2013, that many people believe that that is what allowed the BJP to glue together Hindus of various castes and win the 2014 and then the 2019 elections. And then you have an MP who's 27 years old, who's Muslim, who stood on the Samajwadi Party ticket, called Ikra Hassan, who won this election, but she won it because she decided not to polarize it. She could have, but she didn't. And so she goes to the parliament and asks for something very small and basic, which is precisely what MP should be doing and what people want, which is, hello, can you make sure that that the trains passing through the following routes, that the station stops at these areas where it doesn't stop, so that people have access to trains.
Yes.
This is what people want. It's the small work. It's not the histrionics of the bulldozer and whipping a Muslim in public. That actually does get Yogi some popularity, but underneath that, people are also want more. They do want that blood sport. They are a very cynical, bloodthirsty. That hasn't gone away. But more than that, what they prefer to that is just the ordinary, everyday, regular. And our writing and our assessment on the ground also has to move into the slow and the small and the infinitesimal and the everyday and the regular. That's not happening because people think that it's too boring and it's not going to yield results. Everyone is still looking through the prism of the storming of the Bastille and the breaking of the barricades, big tropes.
Yes.
And we need to look at the small. We need to look at who is watering the trees, and why is it so hot, and where is the space for children to play. And you know what, after these elections, you described that the work I do here is running something called the Sarfaroshi Foundation. We work to try and make people active citizens, and we ask people to describe what their village looks like, and then look at their village again and draw us a second map of the village from the point of view of discrimination, of social discrimination. And you know what people came up with? They came up with very small and terrible things, that there is no place for Valmiki caste Dalits to bury their dead. So after you're dead, if you're from the wrong caste, you don't even have the right to a burial. You don't have a right to for a place for you to throw your garbage, because the Jats are busy throwing their garbage in all the vacant spaces and using that to claim land, common land.
Okay.
Now, these are the everyday issues that affect people and that make people vote against the Jats. So if the Jats is voting for the Samajwadi Party, then the other castes that are oppressed by them end up voting for the BJP. Those castes are still in disarray. Many of them have still voted for the BJP. So the work of the alliance needs to be to work in these small spaces. Can they look at burial grounds? Can they look at garbage disposal? Can they look at the everyday caste cruelty? communalism breaks down into the small, infinitesimal, everyday parts, which is caste. Caste, caste, caste. If you don't see caste, you can't talk about communal.
Wow. Well, that's very beautifully told, that how small things need to be aggregated. And we always think that the voting does not do it. If the political parties can go down to the bottom and do the small bits right, they can aggregate it. It may look slow and boring, even for the journalist and the politician, but this will yield results, because what we have seen from what you're saying is just some sort of a cover up of some anger, but the inside things have not yet changed. So the opposition needs to work in those sections, right?
Yes.
There is one
And
thing.
there's a lot of hope there. This is not a static space. It's moving. It's dynamic every day. So, by the way, that's also a warning. If people are feeling happy that, UP has thrown the BJP out largely, they can also put it right back if they feel that the alliance is not doing anything and has gone off on their various holidays to Europe after the elections.
Yes. I'll keep using the Chudel one. If the Chudel has gone against someone, they can come against you too. That's the message.
Yeah. Constantly subversive, so better watch out.
Yeah. And I wanted to pick up something which you talked about, and you wrote an article on it. And you took 3 killings or 3 deaths in some sense and broke them into 3 different types.
Yes.
Hate crime, lynching, and murder.
Yes.
And you said that this has to be understood better before we go into this one line saying it's mob lynching. Can you take us through why you thought this kind of separating this killing because you did a fact finding through Sarfaroshi? Can you explain why you took that and why you thought it's important? And can you help us understand the difference between the two and why it's relevant? More than anything else, why it's so relevant today?
So, as soon as this election result was over, the liberal media, people like me, people like us, are guilty of saying, now wait and watch, there will be retribution. We will be punished because we have made this government shake, and therefore we will be punished. And then, lo and behold, in the following month, 10 lynchings are reported. One of them was from this area that I live and work in, which is Shamli. So, me and my team decided to go to the family and basically do empathy building. We didn't realize that it would turn out to alter the facts. When we went in and met the family, we realized that a man called Firoz, the original report said that a man called Firoz, who was basically trading in used mobile parts. He used to buy and sell them. So he had a street cart. And street carts usually operate in villages during the day, usually between 11 to 1 and then between 3 and 5 when it's light, not when it's dark. So Firoz would go in and do this, and on this particular day, on the 5th of July, his family had gone to attend a wedding, but he didn't go to attend a wedding. At 8 p.m. apparently, his brothers told that your brother's has been beaten up, so please come. And his brother comes and finds that he's almost dead and he's frothing at the mouth. So he calls up the sister because this brother Firoz was given to convulsions. So he said, "Is this a convulsion? What has happened?" She said, "No, but because he's been frothing at the mouth for more than an hour, it doesn't look like it's convulsions." And by then he was dying, and then he died. Reporters, kind of said, "Okay, Muslim man killed by Hindus, this is a lynching." They reported it as a lynching. Now, when we went in, we said, okay, for a lynching, there needs to be a mob. But we found that these were 3 members of one family. Therefore, it's not a mob. So that first fact turns out to be wrong. Secondly, we said, is this a hate crime? Or one brother was telling the press and also told us that this Firoz could possibly be someone who occasionally was given to drugs. And they also had a theory that they alleged that it's possible that the family that he had gone to visit at 8 in the evening was not to sell wares, but it could be some sort of a drug fix gone wrong. We don't know the facts, but we do know that prima facie, the DM and the SP also gave statements saying that this is not a lynching. Why did the media try and insert this into an already made template that there will be retribution after an election like this, and fix this into a necklace, into a shiny pearl necklace of retribution, crimes and lynchings, when it didn't belong there. Where did this belong, therefore? It belonged right across the other side of this district, across Shamli is Muzaffarnagar, out of which Shamli was carved out. Over there, there was here there was this Muslim man who was killed by 3 Hindus from the Kashyap caste. There was a Kashyap man who was killed by Hindus from the Qureshi caste, from the Sheikh caste. So this seemed like a mirror image of this. So we tried to find out what happened to Ram Nivas. Now Ram Nivas was a Kashyap family that was living in a largely Muslim colony. There was some friction between the two. Apparently he used to use slurs towards Muslims. The Muslims also used slurs on him. We don't know exactly what went down there. But what seems to contextualize Firoz's murder is this Ram Nivas's murder. Both are murders of one person by a set of people. In Firoz's case, of members of one family. So it's possible that they knew each other. So that therefore this fits into the lexicon of murders, that Firoz's crime mirrors Ram Nivas's crime that never got reported. And a third, which is Seema, in the district of Saharanpur. These are all districts abutting each other in western UP. And in Saharanpur, Seema is a Dalit woman from the Chamar caste who was working as an intern, as a nurse at this private hospital. Her body was dumped and her sister was called, saying, come and pick up your sister. She goes there to the hospital, the sister, and finds that her sister is lying there dead, and there are no explanations for how she died, what time she died at. The police, in all 3 cases, the families had to use some sort of political pressure or social pressure or dharnas and protests to get their cases registered. So what seems to be common through all of these 3 cases is not lynchings or communal politics, but just the ordinary fact of people that have no social and financial capital and political capital, their crimes don't get registered. And so when a Muslim man dies, the social capital that he now in a very perverse way has access to is lynching. And we've got to be very careful, because in this area, in western UP, in 2013, the violence against Muslims emerged out of an ordinary crime of a woman being molested, and that turned into Jats versus Muslims instead of a woman being molested. And then this is milked by one side or the other, and often by both, by the BJP on one side to say, look, this is a political crime, and the other side says this is a political crime. What do we miss in this picture is that if we can take it out of this narrative of hate and say this is actually an ordinary crime, this was not a lynching, then we are preventing its use by political actors of hate. And if we describe it as a lynching, we are actually not seeing it for what it is. And similarly, when we at a larger level, when we flatten out caste politics and we say such and such person voted for the BJP because they hate Muslims, we are actually not seeing that they were oppressed by a certain caste. So the templating of our minds into liberal versus non-liberal, Muslim versus Hindu, are actually mirrors of each other. And we have to get out of those polarities and see sometimes how things lie in very ordinary spaces. And that's an uncomfortable truth. In fact, after we did our fact finding, my colleague got phone calls from some different Muslims affiliated to different opposition parties saying, you better watch out. Why have you reported this as a non-lynching? Whose side are you on? Are you getting paid by the district magistrate for this?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Are you on the take?
Okay.
So there's this groupism happening. So I said, wait a minute. There are people who are actually asking us to misrepresent the truth as either a Hindu truth or a Muslim truth. And actually the truth is a third thing. It's neither Hindu truth nor Muslim truth. It is just the truth.
Yes.
And the truth is not always polarized. And when we always put it in a polarized space, we're actually giving the polarized politics much needed heft. We're giving it much more grist than it deserves. And we are actually doing a great disservice to people who are not as polarized as we imagine that they are. So we have to put a curb on our imagination and dial that down if we really want to see a different world. We have to make it by undoing some of the mess that we are making.
Got it. And it seems very similar. Here, the political analyst would use a template to say RSS didn't come or Samajwadi did a calculation better, and use the
Yeah.
template to explain everything. Again,
Yeah.
journalists would sometimes just say, okay, this is lynching. And both of them, the solution is to go down and look at the absolute smallest level, what's happening. Go to the streets, go to the lane, go to the basti, see what is happening, and that will give us a much better picture to resolve and also to understand what's the outcome, right? Like that's what
And
is I'm
sometimes
getting to
when
both.
people go to the ground also, they've got a template in their minds and then they insert whatever they see on the ground into that. Apart from going to the ground, the other thing we need to do is to see what we're not seeing, is that we are wearing these blinkers. And that it is not just the right wing that is wearing the blinkers, it is the left and the left liberals who are also wearing the opposite blinkers, and then the two become mirrors of each other. If we really truly want an open, inclusive society and conversation, it has to be outside of absolutes, because absolutes breed fascism. It is in
Beautiful.
the uncertainty, in the spaces of uncertainty, and oh, I don't know what I'm saying, I don't know where I am, I don't know what this is, that there is hope.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Really helps. I also wanted to take two seats, slightly debated. One you've already mentioned. One is the Faizabad, where a Dalit victory happened, and another Kerana, where Ikra Hassan won.
Yes.
These both are slightly different. I think Ikra has not been talked as much as the Ayodhya one. Can you help us fit into the today lenses, if I could say?
Yes. So yeah, I mean, in my opinion, she fits the Chudel lens perfectly because she defies the communal political lens that this area has been given. So, so this is an area. The Kairana Lok Sabha seat covers part of the district, like all of the district of Shamli and two parts of the district of Saharanpur. Our electoral math is really quite confusing. Sometimes the district doesn't exactly cover the geography. A Lok Sabha seat covers part of one district. It's like, like a centipede. Half its body is lying in one place and half is lying in the other.
Yes.
So in this centipede-ish district called the Kairana Lok Sabha seat, Ikra Hassan is the fourth generation, comes from a very political family. Her father Munawar Hassan was a very successful four-time MP. Her mother was an MP. Her brother is currently an MLA. But what is interesting is how this story undoes the polarized math of this district. In the last decade and a half, this area of Western UP was used by a BJP MP to try and polarize people into saying, look, there's a very large Muslim population. The Muslim population in parts of this district is as high as 40 or 50%. In any case, UP's Muslim population is higher than the national average. The national average of Muslims in the country is 14.3%. In UP, it goes up to 21%. And in the Kairana Lok Sabha, it goes up to anywhere between 30 and 40%, depending on which part of the district you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it is very easy to try and whip up this hysteria against Muslims when there's a large population. You can make Hindus imagine that they're under siege. Now, how does this break down on the ground? It's very easy for us sitting in homes where, when you buy a piece of meat, you go to a shop where it's nicely packaged behind a little glass case and you say, can I please have my 500 grams of keema, and you buy it, or a chunk of ham. You're not actually seeing a goat being slayed in the street and it bleating to death slowly and the smell of the blood going wafting into your house because there's no drainage. When that happens every day and you happen to be vegetarian and from a non-meat eating caste on the opposite side of the road, and then when this goes into an atmosphere of building an imagination of that goat slayer as the other, it's much harder for you to resist that force because you're smelling the blood every day. Now, from that point of view, and when there's a large population of Muslims, and when they all, there's a way in which they look, they have the skull caps, they have the burqas. It's very easy for you to imagine, and you know, like when women, Hindu women, in any case, it is their husbands and their particular caste that dictates where they can and can't go in the village. So in any case, people don't go, if you're a Chamar or you're a Valmiki or you're a Kashyap, you don't go to the non-Kashyap side of the village. You don't even go to the Chamar's house. Forget about the Sayyid or the Sheikh or the Ansari. You don't go to their parts of the village. So they're any way the other. Then there's this smell. Then there's this, oh, you should never go to the other. Now into this, when the politics also helps you along in your imagination, it is very easy for it to be that next step. It's very easy for it to be that next step. So for someone like, and then there was an MP called Hukum Singh from the BJP who said that a lot of Hindus in this area are scared and they've migrated out of this district because of the fear of Muslims. He produced lists of Hindus. Then journalists, some of them from the older NDTV, the non-Adani NDTV, they went and investigated these lists and found that he had crunched together years and years of people having moved out to the natural course of things, where people move out from villages into the cities, and crunched decades of lists together and conflated them in order to polarize the area. The following year, there was this molestation of a girl over which the Jats and the Muslims, there were two Jat boys who were murdered. And then this became a conflagration, a pogrom against Muslims, and many Muslims were killed and many were displaced from their homes. And there was this, the fear of the Muslims then became very real in this area. And that allowed the MPs from this area and the MLAs in the assembly elections that followed to stick together various OBC castes that were living in these areas where goats are being slayed, to say, oh my God, the Muslims are coming to get us. And it's not so far away from their imagination, because in any case, they're the other. So now you can see why this area is so polarized for so long. So for a decade, this was allowed to get full play. And for a decade in 2014 and in 2019, this imagination was built. And then during the pandemic, Muslim vegetable and fruit sellers were actually in Hindu areas, in small towns as well as in the villages, were banned from entering people's streets. They were actually starving because they weren't allowed to sell fruits, because they said that they are, you know, like when in many areas people stick stickers on apples and you know, pears and things like that, because they feel that they can sell this as California apples and make the price go up. Correct. All vegetable and fruit vendors do this. So how do you stick something? You do this and then you stick an apple. So what did people do who wanted to play mischief? They said Muslims are spitting on fruit, and that's how COVID has spread in this area. And they took videos of fruit sellers doing this. And because a large number of fruit sellers are Muslim, they use this to say this is the reason COVID has spread. So in this area, for a Muslim MP like Iqra Hasan to run a non-polarized campaign and throw out the incumbents who won on a decade of polarization was nothing short of miraculous. It was miraculous for two reasons: because she understood that the people were fed up of this and they didn't want polarization. So it is also huge credit to the people for wanting this, and for Iqra to pick up that message from the ground and say, I am here to unpolarize as you people want. That is the story of this area, which is actually a very heartening story. She's 27 years old. She was a political science student. She went to the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. She finished her MA there, and she had signed up for a PhD and came back for the holidays in between, you know, her MA and the start of her MPhil, when her brother Nahid Hasan was jailed. and was fighting a assembly election in 2022. Ikra fought, canvassed, and campaigned for her jailed brother and managed to get him to win his seat. This is 2 years ago when she was 24 and a half.
Yes.
She realized, therefore, that she's a natural, that she's good at this because she said, I did one thing. No one goes and talks to the women. Everyone has these meetings, and at her meetings, it was really quite stunning to see this woman at a rally, and she was the only woman. I was the only other woman at her rally in attendance, and she was the only woman at her rally as the person who was speaking. Every single other person in that Maidan was a man. Political rallies are not attended by women in this area at all. It's hard for someone sitting in Karnataka to imagine that. But that is the kind of testosterone masculine politics that is played out in UP. So this girl who's 24 and a half goes from door to door and decides to go to women's homes. That had not happened. That is why she's a witch. Because she does the ordinary thing that no one else thinks about. Go to women's homes, talk to them, relate to them, meet them. And then because she comes from a slightly liberal Muslim family, she didn't wear a burqa. She covered her head in a very normal way like the Hindu women also do here. And she said that many other women and other women journalists remarked that, this makes you appeal to both Hindus and Muslims. The other thing that she did is that she didn't use her education as arrogance, which is something that is a very masculine thing to do. Oh, I know this, I know. And the I know is very irritating to most people. They just want you to shut the most of the time and listen. She shut the listened. I'm sorry, you might have to bleat out the F words, but she just listened, and it was very interesting seeing that at her own rally, she spoke last, and everyone else, all these masculine, these testosterone driven men in various panchayat after panchayat, was very impressed with how humble she was and how open she was and how deferential she was. Because the men here still want to feel that they're in control, and then they're happy to cede some. That is why it was subversive.
Super. Yes.
She allowed them, and I asked her if she did this consciously. She said, in my home, I'm a bully, and my mother and my brother are shit scared of me. So she knows her real persona is not that deferential. But her political persona, in the interest of listening to the population and in the interest of being subversive and realizing what it takes to win a seat, she did this, which is truly subversive and witch-like.
Super. Beautiful. And it is such a different than the Albert Camus' Rebel and the breaking of the Bastille, or even for me, one of the first ones was breaking of Berlin Wall. It looks like the history when Berlin Wall breaks. And that's how I imagined, because I had seen it through the lens of television. And to see what Ikra did is a complete opposite of what happened in Berlin Wall. And she changed something dramatically. So I love the way the analysis has been done to help us understand there's something more than what we see in the top, and some analysis, some algebra, some arithmetic around it, and even some jargons, right? There's something.
It's a cellular structure. You have to attack the cellular structure of a system and change it very quietly, one cell at a time. And before you know it, you've got a different color blood flowing in your veins, and you don't even know it. You've turned into another animal.
Correct.
And the person who's done this to you is laughing very quietly because she doesn't want you to feel bad.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So I also picked up something about the Chudels, because there's a lovely book on the ghosts.
How amazing!
So I found that it says that many of the Chudels are supposed to be those who die on the childbirth, during the childbirth. So they become Chudels. So in fact, UP has the highest maternal mortality rate, and Kerala has the lowest. Although they are not scientifically connected, are we saying that is why we see subversiveness much more in UP, and we see a little less in Kerala because of the results? Although they're not scientifically related, I wanted you to tell us about both from this.
Beautifully put, Venkat. It is true that, the reason I use the Chudel metaphor in UP is also because I saw the chudel drawn on mud walls in people's homes, in home after home after home. And my male colleague, Ashwini, who's a very intelligent male version of the chudel, he said that, when he was a child and he was a Dalit and going to school, the Dalit was always the kid who was punished by the teacher, made to be a murga, which means you have to sit on your haunches and another kid will sit on top of you and you have to hop one on top of the other in the class if you've not done your maths homework. And it's horrifying and humiliating. And the tales of cruelty are truly shocking from the schools over here. So he would go home. He actually saw his teacher rape a fellow child in front of him in the class. And he said, we went to school and actually saw my teacher's penis in the class. And it was horrifying to have to go to school the next day and the next day and the next day. And so he would draw this chudel on the wall, and that would help him drive away the fear. He said, I tried praying to God and that didn't help. So I thought maybe let me draw an evil spirit and see if that helps me calm down. And a lot of people, a lot of children who can't actually talk about these horrible things that they see around them in this area, they draw chudels because they feel that that is a wicked witch who will drive away the bigger evil that is present in their lives. A horrible teacher who's raping someone, or a man who's taken a young boy to the field and sodomized him, possibly. All of these things are tales, horrifying tales from my colleagues. And the witch is actually something that is a symbol for a child to feel that you've got your little weapon. It's their Harry Potter kind of magic wand that they use to drive away the evil that they face from the adults, the horrible adult world that they are forced to reckon with and that they don't want to deal with. So it makes them feel that this magic juice can help them reverse this a little bit. So there needs to be that. Then they find their own ways. Either they run away from the school. In Ashwini's case, he rang up. He couldn't bear it when he heard other children being beaten in their school. So when his friend told him about the horrible teacher in his school, he went to the phone booth and he rang up that school and he said, "Hello," in a little voice, 8-year-old. I believe you still have that teacher there. Your school has a bomb. I'm going to blow your school up, he said in a little voice. The shopkeeper hearing this said, "Come here, little boy. What did you just do? Who did you call?" But that was his way of being a witch, to drive away the horrible circumstances that he and other kids were faced with. So you need some magic, you need some witch's brew and some potion. And that is why we all grew up with these stories of witches. Because when we say we're scared of the dark, actually we're scared of adults. We're scared of the terrible world of the daylight that we have to deal with, and then it becomes night. And then we feel that we've got a little bit of control because the day is ended. So the day of this political universe is turning slowly, but it isn't yet night. But we're all trying to kind of use our little magic potion in some way or the other and see what little juice we can throw, where we can throw it, and do it in a small way so that we're not kind of, ending up with our brothers and sisters dead in the street. But we still manage to turn things inside out in a cellular way. And I think that's the smarter way to do it, because it's the only way to achieve a structural shift. If you look at revolutions, after the French Revolution, we've been talking so much about the storming of the Bastille. There was the 100 Days of Blood and Robespierre, and people ended up with their heads on a stake. And then the politics of France didn't change for more than, 1 century after the French Revolution. There was Napoleon. So after the pretend democracy, there was a dictatorship. And that should be a lesson to us. After a pretend democracy, is there a dictatorship? And then where do we go from there? How long will it take for us to actually bring about a structural shift? And therefore, is a revolution not the right metaphor for a structural shift? Do we need to look more carefully at how to look inside the structure of things? And does that mean looking at the everyday? The other woman who actually taught us a lot about how to look at fascism was Hannah Arendt. When she wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism, she actually talked about the banality of evil and how evil has to be broken down in its everyday. It's the everyday practices against the Jews that then went and turned into the Nuremberg laws much later. When there was social sanction at the everyday level, then it became law. So, you know, before there is a Muzaffarnagar law, a ruling by the district saying that all shopkeepers have to on their carts have to say what religion they're from before they sell fruits to the cowards going to Haridwar. And then activists took this to the Supreme Court and had that administrative order struck down. But how did that administrative order, which is Nuremberg-like, how did that reach that point? Because there's been already a decade or two of social sanction where the cowards are allowed to be this lumpen element and ride roughshod across the district, and the district administration is pressed into service to allow their hooliganism up to a certain point. And that social sanction is the everyday evil, and it has to be countered by the everyday unevil. We have to undo it by looking at our own action every day. So if we're looking at, okay, what is it that we are doing in our everyday practice? Are we keeping separate dishes for the person who comes to clear the garbage? When we celebrate a festival and we want to really build an inclusive society, when is the last time we invited the person who cleans our garbage to our Diwali festival in our house? And when did we go to their Diwali festival? And if we are not living together, how can we actually build an inclusive society? What is it in our little enclaves of separation that we need to break and shatter at the everyday level? The banality of unevil begins with the practice of this banal everyday unpolarization.
It reminds me of one of the definitions of love given to me by my senior. I always loved it. He said what love is. He said छोटी सी बारिश जब होती है तुम्हें लगता है कि तुम भाग के घर पहुंच जाओगे, भीगोगे नहीं, और जैसे ही भाग के जाते हो तुम्हें लगता है भीगते नहीं हो, जैसे ही घर पहुंचते हो तो पूरी तरह भीग जाते हो. तो वो छोटी छोटी बारिश जिस तरह से आपकी पूरी तरह भिगो देती है, that is everyday life. And he said that's what love is. You don't have to have something dramatic about it. And sometimes I think the way you explain things, you're saying to all of us through both your political analysis and later the lynching analysis and even Ikra's work, it looks like what we need to do is look back and into those day-to-day things, what we do. Yeah. And that's how we can reconstruct this. And here, the Chudel framework, the trans and the feminine framework will do much better than the Berlin Wall kind of framework. Right? That's
yeah, and I think our storytelling has to make these everyday things more interesting, like Leo Tolstoy did. You know, he was in like and Orhan Pamuk did in the Museum of Innocence. You know, and he was actually quoting Tolstoy to say the novel where you understand the everyday, you hero the everyday life. And I think Gitanjali Sri did that brilliantly in Tomb of Sand. You know, Ret Samadhi, which won the Booker, because she spent chapters and chapters. People say, but this is describing a woman's back for chapters. This main character in the story doesn't even move, doesn't even get off her bed for 6 chapters or 10 chapters or 1/3 of the book. But the beauty is in the everyday of the crows who are watching her and their meetings that they're having in the trees, and the saris and where she bought this sari and what that sari looks like, and what the different kinds of sweetmeats that are sold in the street, what they smell like. And what does it mean to always have the door open in a traditional society? There's no privacy, there's no closing of the door. What does a wall see? What does a door see? When we make these everyday spaces interesting, we don't need to look for big ruptures.
Thank you so much. It's very, very helpful to understand UP, its election from a slightly different perspective. Thank you so much for joining us, and
thanks for allowing me the space to sprinkle some Chudel juice. I hope everyone
thank you so much.
Got infected.
We would always be happy to host you back in EDINA whenever you're in Bangalore. Thank you so much. I'll ask all the audience to support independent media and also EDINA through
it's the best place. It's the most woke, happening, subversive place to be. I'm very happy to have been called here.
Oh, thank you so much. and also to all the other independent institutions, because they're doing a great job. They need the support of people, financial, and also the moral support. So again, asking the audience to do that. Thank you, Revati. I will stop the recording.
ಮತ್ತಷ್ಟು ವಿಶೇಷ ವಿಡಿಯೋಗಳನ್ನು ನೋಡಲು ಮತ್ತು ಹೊಸ ವಿಡಿಯೋಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಿಳಿಯಲು
eedina.com ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬ್ ಚಾನೆಲ್ ಸಬ್ಸ್ಕ್ರೈಬ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಮತ್ತು ಬೆಲ್ ಐಕಾನ್ ಕ್ಲಿಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ.